Welcome to the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam, editor-in-chief of thenationalpulse.com. Right, well, I was going to open the show today with the market reactions to the president leaving Walter Reed, and everyone's grateful for that. But the market is suddenly tanking, taking a very sudden dip in the last 10 minutes or so, on the back of what appears to be an announcement by the President of the United States. I'm going to read this out to you, break some news here with you guys, so bear with me. The President tweeting just a few moments ago, quote, Nancy Pelosi is asking for $2.4 trillion to bail out poorly run, high-crime Democrat states, money that is in no way related to COVID-19. He goes on. Quote, we made a very generous offer of $1.6 trillion, and as usual, she is not negotiating in good faith. The President of the United States continues, I am rejecting their request. And looking to the future of our country, I have instructed my representatives to stop negotiating until after the election, when immediately after I win, we will pass a major stimulus bill that focuses on hardworking Americans and small businesses. The tweets continue. Quote, I have asked Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell not to delay, but instead to focus full time on approving my outstanding nominee to the United States Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett. Our economy is doing very well. The stock market is at record levels. Jobs and unemployment are also coming back in record numbers. We are leading the world in economic recovery, and all caps, the best is yet to come. Well, the market certainly didn't think so. Currently trading down about 300 points on the back of the announcement. Looked like there is going to be any serious stimulus package before the election. And I want to hear from you guys out there. Whether or not you think this is a good idea or a bad idea. Nancy Pelosi obviously not negotiating in good faith. Nancy Pelosi never negotiates in good faith. So how are we stuck between those two numbers, and what does it tell you guys out there about the president's response to the pandemic and ongoing stimulus and economic response to that? I want to hear from you guys on Twitter, in the live chat and beyond. I have my own thoughts on this. Just like I had my own thoughts this morning on the War Room show about the president's early morning tweet that has now been removed by big tech about the flu. It was very clear back in May, when the president's own friends were contracting the coronavirus, that he didn't believe it was anything like the flu. And I do think it's a mistake for the president to get into those comparisons. The flu, if you believe that the flu directly killed anyone, killed about 35,000 people in the United States in 2018, not the 210,000 we're talking about with the Chinese Communist Party's virus. So I don't think the comparison necessarily stands. Nevertheless, we enter into a new flu season, with many hospitals now reporting on being told a lack of flu vaccine. And whether or not you think that the president was right or wrong in his tweet from this morning, you have to also take into account that there are lots of people around this country, lots of people indeed around the world, who will look at the president's own medical team, knowing that he had access to the best medical team out there, the best medications out there, the experimental cocktails, things that money cannot even buy. And I don't think it's right for him to come out and say, oh, you know what, you shouldn't necessarily worry about this because I'm quite fine now. And we know in the last hour or so that the president actually is not showing any symptoms of COVID-19, and everybody's incredibly grateful for that. But I want to understand from you guys whether or not you think this is the right way to go about this. Our guest in this show, we have two today. Steve Cortes from the Trump campaign will join us, and I'll be putting these questions to him. If you're watching this live in the YouTube live chat, make sure you get involved in the live chat. I want to hear questions from you that you might like Steve Cortes to answer, and it's of course very appropriate timing because Steve Cortes is an expert in the markets. Maybe he can explain to me what the Dow is doing right now. I mean, as I'm looking at it right here in front of me, currently down about 310 points. So we blew through the opener here that I was going to talk to you about. I was going to talk to you about a lot of the polling that's been coming out. The polling from Monmouth to Change Research to SSRS, 4 points, 6 points, 8 points, 10 points, 12 points, 14 points, 16 points. they'll make as much up as they can. This is, you can either call this the political polling complex, or you can call this the contribution in kind pollsters that are out there right now. And I'm just very grateful to Mark Levin, the great one, for giving us a shout out on the National Pulse yesterday. In fact, he called me terrific, which I never thought I'd hear from somebody so wise as Mark Levin. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. But because the National Pulse is going through all of these polls, the crosstabs, the lines on each of these polls, deep diving into them and showing how they don't make sense. However, and I'm going to put this question to Steve Cortes as well, despite the data not making sense, is the trajectory correct? i.e., is the Trump campaign, after its big momentum over the last couple of weeks before the debate, has it been stopped in its tracks, and does Joe Biden have more momentum now? The data suggests that whether or not you think the 5 points, 6 points, 14 points, all of that. I mean, they did all that with Hillary Clinton back in October of 2016, remember. But is the momentum, is the trajectory correct? We'll be exploring that over the course of the show with Steve Cortes, and the second guest is actually one of our National Pulse members that I spoke to on the phone last week. And I just said, I think it's such an important thing to have the real voices of America, ordinary people out there on this show to talk about the things that they're concerned about. So Jason Underwood, one of our newest members, will be joining us in the last two segments in this show, and I'll ask him what he thinks about everything that's taking place. Far wiser person than I am as it pertains to the market. So Jason Underwood will be joining us later on in this show. In the meantime, stay tuned, get your comments, your questions in. We'll speak to Steve Cortes about all of this breaking news in just a moment here on the National Pulse. I'm Raheem Kassam. Make sure you're heading over to thenationalpulse.com. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the National Pulse. Well, we're up this morning, not majorly up on the markets, about 100 points, just continuing on the stock market's recovery, as we've seen in recent days, especially since President Trump was said to be okay and recovering just fine from the CCP virus. But today we've taken an awfully negative turn, and we'll be talking to Steve Cortes about that in just a few moments. I want to reflect for a moment, however, on these two campaigns right now. I think and I hope that you'll know by this point in time that I'm a pretty fair dealer with these things. If things are going well, I'm the first to congratulate people. If things are going badly, I'm kind of the first to blow the whistle. And I don't think things are necessarily in bad shape yet, but I don't believe the trajectory is correct. Now, blame that on whatever and whomever you want, the Chinese Communist Party and its virus, but it is going through the upper echelons of the Trump administration right now. And every single time a new person contracts the coronavirus, I do not believe that the optics are good. I do not believe that you have the correct stewardship in the messaging right now, and I do not believe that there is yet a publicly declared plan of how this president gets his message out to people. Hear me out. There's a lot of people out there who go, oh, don't panic, it'll be fine. The job of people like me is to have these panicked intervention moments so that people understand that you cannot ease up on the accelerator with 20-odd something days to go until an election. There was great momentum 2 weeks ago. And of course it has been arrested by this Chinese Communist Party virus. So what's the way around it? How does the president blow through the media bias and the narrative that they're spinning every day? Oh, he ripped his mask off, it's the end of the world. How do you get your message through all of those things? How does the president continue to be seen by the American public? How does he continue to G up his base? Remember, enthusiasm is something that we keep talking about. We've heard a lot about on this show. We've talked about it on The War Room. We've talked about it. Steve Cortes knows about it. He'll be on with us soon. Jason Miller's come on this show and talked about it. The pollsters understand that the enthusiasm levels between the Biden and the Trump campaigns may make all of the difference. So how do you keep that enthusiasm up? This morning on The War Room, I suggested that the president might want to do whatever you want to call them, fireside chats, direct to camera, live streams, every single day. For the next couple of days or week or 10 days or whatever it is he's supposed to be quarantining for, how do you reach people directly? How do you go through Periscope or through YouTube or through whatever it is to reach people directly? Because the media is always going to clip their moments and take their moments. And the Democrats are always going to try and crib from the president. In fact, I want to play the latest advert, commercial, whatever you call it, from the Democratic campaign, from Joe Biden's campaign, where you can see brazenly how they're trying to muscle in on Donald Trump's territory. Let's roll this.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
This election is about building this country back better. And that's what Joe and I will do. We'll create millions of jobs, bring back critical supply chains so the future is made in America, build on the Affordable Care Act, offer caregivers the dignity, the respect, and the pay they deserve. We have a chance to choose a better future for our country.
The future will be made in America under Joe Biden. Well, that's funny because the past was made in China. The past was outsourced to China. The past was all China. And we're going to show you on the National Pulse over the next coming days more of how Joe Biden was praising the Chinese Communist Party's plan just a few years ago. Now, suddenly, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, oh, we're made in America. We want the future made in America. Build back better, by the way. Build back better. Also the slogan of the British Conservative Party and Boris Johnson. It's all happening again. The same globalist forces converging. By the way, the British Conservative Party is in no way, shape or form a conservative party. It is a centre-left social democratic party. It finds more in common with the Democratic Party of the United States than it does with the Republican Party. I think they actually stopped sending people over even to liaise with the Republican Party. I think now Boris Johnson's team only liaises with the Democrats. So Build Back Better is their slogan on both sides of the Atlantic, these two social democratic parties. These two groups, which have been outsourcing and been sending jobs abroad for decades. I believe our guest is on the line now. I want to bring Steve Cortes in to reflect on this. Steve, have you seen, and by the way, thank you for joining us here. I'm worked up today, so forgive me. Have you seen this latest advertisement from the Biden camp? They say the future's made in America under them, Steve.
Right. Well, listen, there's a phrase that the sincerest form of flattery is imitation. So in that regards, I guess we should be flattered that they are trying to pretend to be nationalists, economic nationalists particularly. But the record reveals exactly the opposite. Particularly when you look at Joe Biden, if you look at his half century in the Washington swamp, the only real accomplishment, if we can call it that, I say that in air quotes, the only real accomplishment of his tenure during 47 years in office has been exporting American jobs all over the world. He's been the best friend that corporate multinational chief executives could ever have. He's also been the best friend that the Chinese Communist Party could ever have in Washington, D.C., because he has been a principal architect of trade deals that have, excuse me, that have worked to the detriment of American workers for decades, that were not reciprocal, were not fair, and led to, specifically regarding China, and this is according to the Economic Policy Institute, which is a left-leaning think tank, so this is not Trump campaign analysis, according to the EPI, led directly to the closing of 60,000 American factories and 3.2 million American manufacturing job losses. That's who he is. So no matter what he says, no matter what he portends now, embracing the phrases of economic nationalism, the reality is he is a true Delaware senator. And what I mean by that is he is a corporatist globalist. And if he is put back into office, yes, he has made some deals with the devil with the far left. Yeah. But if he is put back into office...
We're going to jump to a quick commercial break here. You joined us halfway through and we're really incredibly grateful for you being here with us. We're going to hold you over a couple more segments. Got lots of questions to put to you, including what should I be doing with my stocks right now? Steve Cortes, senior advisor to the Trump campaign, will join us in the next segment here on the National Pulse. And we want your questions as well. We don't just call ourselves the National Pulse. We take the National Pulse. I want to hear from you guys in the live chat. We actually have one of our members joining us in the last segment on this show today. Ordinary people out there joining up. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the National Pulse here on Real America's Voice. And I got to say, there's probably no greater Real America's Voice than Steve Cortes, Trump campaign senior advisor, truly somebody who loves this country, joins us on the line now. Steve, I'm having kittens over here, man. I'm losing some money. The president's tweet just wiped so many of my gains in the last 20 minutes. Help me out here. What is going on?
Sure.
Why are we not going to get a stimulus package?
Well, and yes, listen, I'm happy to speak to this. I spent 25 years on Wall Street before Donald Trump dragged me into this crazy game of politics. Sometimes I miss the days when I just talked about stocks, Raheem, because nobody hated me out there when I was only debating stocks and earnings. But to get to your question and your point, there's a lot of volatility right now in markets. I think it's being driven by two things. Clearly, today's volatility, I think, is directly attributable to the fact that for now negotiations have broken down over stimulus. But I will tell you, forgetting about the market for a moment, just as an American, I'm glad that the president is holding the line. He is unwilling to allow Nancy Pelosi to exploit the pandemic to try to bail out profligate states, places like my home state of Illinois, which is America's Greece without the sunshine and without the ruins, and to try to say that tax-paying citizens of responsible states, places like Oklahoma and Florida, should be subsidizing the nonsense of those blue states. He's not allowing that to happen. He does want substantive relief for people who are still out there hurting economically. And although the economy has been roaring back to life, we are also very keenly aware that there are too many people who are still out of work. We still have work to do to get back to the heights of the Trump boom where we were just in the early parts of this year. But regarding the market, too, I think context is also important, even though there has been a lot of volatility lately. Let's also remember, if we use the Dow Jones as a gauge, and there's a lot of gauges we could use, but that's the most popular one, even right here, I think we're just a shade below 28,000. Roughly the range of the year has been 29,000 on the upside where we were before the China virus. We got down to roughly 18,000 on the downside at the lockdown lows. So in that scheme of things, we are very, very close to all-time highs. And the rally off of the lows was really just absolutely historic. I would also tell you this, though, Raheem, I care about the stock market. I absolutely want it to do well because it is a read of a country's success. But politically speaking, and even economically speaking, I don't think it is the primary driver of real prosperity for our country. The stock market did very well during the slow growth Obama years, which rewarded the owners of assets, but workers languished because their wages stagnated. What we see now in Donald Trump is an economy that can both reward capital, but more importantly to me, reward work. Wages are accelerating quickly. That's not just my opinion. The recent data show us that. Just last Friday, we got out the latest jobs report. We now have over 11 million jobs created over the last 5 months, and the pace of wage acceleration, 4.7% in the last month on an annual basis. That is outstanding wage growth. That matters a lot more to most Americans than the stock market. The deplorables don't tend to own a lot of stock, but it sure matters to them if pay is going up.
It matters, and I'm not somebody who's previously owned a lot of stock in the past either, and I would tend to agree with you that people are much more concerned about wage growth. However, a lot of people were crossing their fingers for this stimulus package. Sure. Is there going to be a level of transparency about rejecting Nancy Pelosi's proposals, i.e., can the public see these proposals? Can we break it down into line items at any point and go, oh, I see, Nancy Pelosi actually was calling for money for nothing to bail out the Democrat cities that we've heard so much about? Or are we just supposed to take it on faith that that's what's been going? Because she'll have a whole different story about it.
Sure, of course. No, and to your point, and, I work for the campaign. I don't work for the White House nor for the Treasury Department, which is leading negotiations. So I cannot speak for them. But I'm just speaking now as American citizen, Steve Cortes, and as a supporter of the president. I would like that kind of transparency. I think you're exactly right. I think it would be helpful for the country, number one. But number two, putting my campaign hat back on, it would be helpful for the campaign to have a level of transparency. And Mnuchin was the lead on these negotiations. So I think that'll be primarily his responsibility to hopefully fulfill that task. I think you're exactly right, though. Look, I just think a general principle of governing is the more transparency, the better. This president has been the most transparent politician in American history. Sometimes it gets him into hot water, but on the whole, I think it's been an incredible attribute of him. And I think you're exactly correct. We'd like to see that kind of transparency regarding this current breakdown in negotiations.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it also may give some people in the market some a little bit more confidence about what's going on here. I think what you're seeing right now is a knee-jerk reaction, right? Which is to say, oh, we're not going to get the billions upon billions injection that we have long been promised. But the point is that the two things have to play together. Politics and the economy have to play together. One can't be seen to bribe or blackmail the other. And have these great expectations without some level of compromise. I mean, somebody's paying for this at the end of the day, so we've got to keep that in mind. Steve, when we come back, especially, but maybe have a moment for this here as well. I want to just reflect on the last couple of days with you. The polls are saying that you guys are losing ground all over the place. The polls are saying that you're close to nearly 20 points down in some places that were almost level before. Now, there's plenty of pushback to be had on those. We've been doing some of it in terms of the data and the statistics of these polls on the National Pulse ourselves. But let me ask you this question bluntly. Do you guys feel like you're losing momentum?
I don't think so. I'll concede this. I'm not sure that we've been gaining momentum in recent days either, and that is concerning. Now, I believe we will restart that, particularly as the president gets back in the saddle, which it seems will happen imminently. That will certainly be helpful. But in terms of losing ground, no, and I know you've done quite a bit of work. You know more than I do, certainly, about the constitution of these polls, what the inputs are. Of course, in many cases, determines the output and the oversampling of Democrats. So that's very concerning. I will tell you this, and I mean concerning not for the Trump campaign, concerning for the validity of the polls. But I will tell you this as a campaign worker and operative. I pay attention to polls, but I'm not slavishly driven by them. They are not the North Star. They don't determine everything we do in terms of tactics. And I think 2016 is proof positive that sometimes that is the correct approach. Pay attention to polls, but again, they're not the driving force. I would also say this, a poll that I do pay a lot of attention to is the question, which is often asked in both public polling as well as the private polling we have here at the campaign. And that question is this: who do you think is going to win the election? And when that question is asked, overwhelmingly, the response is actually Donald Trump. We consistently lead in that question. Here's why I think it's important, Raheem. I think there is understandably a reluctance among a lot of Americans because of this unfortunate, pervasive cancel culture in America, where you can face sanctions socially, in employment, otherwise. You can face sanctions for being an America First believer or a Trump supporter. I think it's reasonable for us to suspect that there is a shy Tory effect from your homeland going on here with Trump. And to me, probably the best statistical way, quantitative way to get to that is asking, who do you think will win?
Let's go to a quick break now. Steve Cortes, Trump campaign senior advisor, joins us here on the National Pulse. We'll get into more of that. Don't go anywhere right after this break. Welcome back to the National Pulse. Our guest in this segment is Trump campaign senior advisor Steve Cortes. Now, Steve, you said that you worked in the markets for a long time and then you were dragged into the political world and people hate you here. But I don't think people hate you. I think person hates you. I think that person is Chris Wallace, especially after this the latest altercation over his moderating of that debate the other night, still getting a lot of play. I know you had another argument about it on that channel, which shall not be named here on Real America's Voice. But what is going on? Tell us more.
So, I was on Chris Wallace's show on Sunday, Fox News Sunday, and I've been on it quite a few times. Look, he's a tough questioner, and what I told him on air this past Sunday is I welcome tough questions. I think that's the proper role of the press, is to be correctly skeptical. What is not the proper role is to become the de facto opposition, to become, in this case, the so-called resistance to President Trump. And I think that Chris Wallace has jumped that shark. He is part of the resistance to President Trump. It was clear to me on debate night last Tuesday. I was there in the debate hall. It was certainly clear to the tens of millions, I think almost 100 million Americans total, who are watching from home. President Trump had to debate not one opponent, but two, because Chris Wallace was not a fair moderator. He didn't even pretend to be neutral and to be a referee. Instead, he inserted himself constantly into the debate, into the dialogue. He saved Joe Biden on several occasions. And by the way, let me be really specific, because unlike the left, we conservatives believe in evidence, not just sloganeering. So I want to give you two specifics from the debate where he directly became an opponent of President Trump rather than a moderator. The first one is he spread the most damnable lie in American public life, the Charlottesville hoax, the Fine People hoax, the idea that President Trump called bigots in Charlottesville.
And you have been the one who's been debunking this for years and years and done an excellent job of it.
Yes, thank you. So, no, it was particularly galling to me to be there, right, and to hear this lie spread once again by the moderator, then spread by Joe Biden. They were assisting each other. And think of how many millions of Americans who aren't particularly political were hearing that for the first time and probably believing it, believing that their president praised violent bigots in Charlottesville when the exact opposite is actually true. So I thought it was important to call Wallace out.
Steve, it's been about 3 minutes since the president condemned white supremacy. Why isn't he condemned white supremacy again in this segment?
Exactly. He is not, to my knowledge, he hasn't condemned Satanism either. So obviously he's a Satanist. We're going to assume that. And then the second thing that Wallace, the way he framed questions, and again, I want to be specific here, the way he framed the specific question on critical race theory, and instead of calling critical race theory what it actually is, which is itself racism, which is trying to tell white people, to force white people who happen to work for big companies or happen to work for federal departments, to force them to endure lectures telling them they are guilty by virtue of their pigment, of their skin color, which is the definition of racism. Instead of framing critical race theory as it actually is, Chris Wallace said it's about sensitivity training. Well, everybody's in favor of being sensitive as human beings, but that was a totally dishonest framing. And it, again, was indicative. It wasn't as bad as the Charlottesville lie, but it was indicative and revealing of the fact that he was not even pretending or efforting in any sense to be a neutral moderator. And so I called him out on it on his show. He sure didn't appreciate it. It caused quite a stir in social media, both positive and negative, quite an uproar. But I think it's important for this country. It's beyond just what he says to me on air or even what he says to Donald Trump. It's important for our country to have a real fourth estate.
Well, okay, fine. But, I mean, it does get ridiculous sometimes. And answer me this, Steve. I mean, how does the campaign accept a former Joe Biden intern as the next debate moderator, knowing that even the Fox moderator was trash? We're now going even further to the left?
I know. So Scully is, you're right, he interned for Joe Biden. He also worked for Ted Kennedy. And much more recently, his social media history has a lot of really disparaging things to say about Donald Trump. Now, when you say accept, though, here was the ultimatum for the campaign. It was either accept this moderator or don't debate, because it's not, unfortunately, it's not a negotiation between the two camps. There is a supposedly bipartisan commission on presidential debates. I say supposedly because, of course, the Republicans on that commission, including the chairman of it, Frank Fahrenkopf, former RNC chair, are complete never-Trump Republicans. These are establishment swamp creatures. We thought as a campaign that it is better to accept a fight even on unfair terms than to not engage in the fight at all. I hope that's not the wrong calculus. What I will say about the Miami debate, though, that is reassuring to me is that Scully's role shouldn't be nearly as prominent as Wallace's, because it is a town hall style. There are going to be regular Americans, real American citizens, supposedly who are undecided. I hope the commission does its job in that regard. And when the president speaks to regular Americans, I think he connects in a way that is so genuine. I saw it in the ABC town hall he did just a couple weeks ago, and that was with George Stephanopoulos, who couldn't be more biased as a moderator. And I thought the president thrived. I think he will again in Miami.
Steve, I want to understand, you said in the last segment that you didn't necessarily think the campaign was picking up momentum. It's my perspective, and we're adults and we can disagree with this, that I do think the campaign is losing momentum. That's not necessarily an attack on anybody there or saying that you're doing anything wrong, but this coronavirus, the CCP virus thing, it is having an impact, and of course it takes the president off the campaign trail where he shines, where he flourishes, where he makes people laugh and makes people feel loved, and they chant back to him, we love you, we love you. We've seen it all. So what's going to be the strategy in the coming days when he has to stay in place, in situ, in the White House? I understand Operation MAGA, you're all great surrogates, but no offense to you, none of you are Donald Trump. So how do we get Donald Trump's voice out there?
I totally agree. And by the way, this would please my high school Latin teachers, the nuns who taught me Latin. I'm going to use a phrase. He is sui generis. He is one of a kind, clearly. And so a lot of us can and we are going to stand in the breach, and we're going to deliver content. We're going to flood the zone with people and information and persuasion. But you're right. None of us is Donald Trump. So what can we do to answer your question? Well, number one, the trajectory of his recuperation so far is so optimistic that it looks like he's going to be back on the field battlefield before we know it. But if that is not the case, and even in the meantime, there's a lot we can do. We all know this in the world of 2020. There's a lot we can do digitally. There's a lot we can do with broadcasting. I can't share details yet regarding some of those plans, but believe me, we are in intense planning stages right now for what we can do.
Listen, Steve, we've got to go to our break. We're so grateful for you joining us here on the show. By the way, if he wants to sit down and do a one-on-one interview, I'm happy to do that. You let him know anytime. I'll put the face shield on or whatever you want, okay?
He tweets you all the time, so I'm sure he'd be interested.
I think we should do it. Steve Cortes, thank you so much for joining us here on the National Pulse. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Raheem.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, stick around as we speak to Jason Underwood in the next segment. He's a venture capital investor and one of the new members of thenationalpulse.com. You can become one of those members by going to fundrealnews.com, and I really hope you do in this break. Do it. We'll be back in just a second. Well, there's a big old hurricane, Cat 4, I believe, Delta, that's going to charge towards the Gulf Coast. We're going to be keeping an eye on it here on Real America's Voice, but also on our partner network on Weather Nation. So make sure if you're in the line of whatever they call it for that, make sure you're tuned into Weather Nation. I have never in my life seen such devastation to a kind of built-up areas when I went down to the Gulf Coast in 2016 to see the carnage that one of these storms creates down there. So my thoughts and my prayers are with all of you who may be affected by that, and Weather Nation's going to do its uttermost best job to bring you live breaking up to the minute, up to the second details of that. Okay, so look, my next guest, you probably never heard of him. I'd never heard of him until last week. His name's Jason Underwood. Jason is a venture capital investor, a man who's done pretty well for himself. I think, Jason, you wouldn't mind me saying so. A very successful man and somebody who's chosen, here's how you know, a mark of success, to join the National Pulse as one of our members. And I spoke with Jason last week. If you join the National Pulse as a lifetime member, you will get a personal phone call from me. And Jason, I like to think it wasn't a perfunctory call. We actually got into it. We spent a significant time on the phone together, and to the point where I actually said at the end of it, look, I'd love to have you on the show. You are the pulse of the nation. You are the American dream being lived out down there in Texas. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I want to hear from you what you have to say about what Steve Cortes was telling us.
Sure. Okay. Thanks for having me, Raheem. Glad to join you and your audience. As you alluded to, my lovely wife and 4 children and I are on a beautiful ranch in central Texas, an area called the Hill Country. We're about an hour and 15 minutes west of Austin and about an hour north of San Antonio, and it's just a beautiful corner of the world. Got here via a business career that took me through New York City, doing the private equity investment banking roles, and then on to Toronto, where I founded and ran a public company, was able to sell that to a larger competitor, and did some other businesses and some other public ventures along the way, but was able to, about 7 years ago, pick where we wanted to raise our children and homeschool it. We homeschool the kids as well, and we picked here in Texas, and we love it. My dad's side of the family is from Texas going way back, so it's something that I'm familiar with. As a kid, I spent summers here visiting grandma. And it just really speaks to who we are as a family, the values that we uphold, and like I said, couldn't be happier.
Jason, you sound like just the all-American guy, and I said that, right, the American dream. You know, semi-retire out to a ranch in Texas sounds good to me. So, Jason, as somebody who has, worked very hard to get that and to build that life for your family, what do you think about this race at the moment? Specifically, what do you think about what Steve Cortes was telling us about the market reaction to the news that broke just before we went live, that the president has told his negotiators, we're not going to talk about the stimulus with Nancy Pelosi until after the election?
Well, I'm probably not the best guy to speak to some of those campaign-specific items, but I can say on a broader basis, And then the focus is tightening. People are starting to pay attention, and so things that happen inside of 30 days of an election get a lot of attention. The fact that there's not going to be a stimulus, or it doesn't look like there'll be a stimulus, you're going to get the algo traders that are just going to look at that as a negative headline. You're going to have a sell-off. Probably recovers tomorrow, might recover in the next 15 minutes. I don't know. But if I could speak for a second, drop back to small town America, here where I am in Texas, numbers just came out earlier this week. I don't know exact release date, but I became aware of them recently. In our county in Central Texas, the unemployment rate is at 4.0%, which is a staggering number, thinking that Texas has some pretty stringent mandates. Bars are still closed, large gatherings are restricted, outdoor activities, a big thing around here is live music. That's pretty much shut down, at least on a larger scale, the larger performers. Festivals, conventions, as you know, create a tremendous economic activity. Yet at the same time, we've got 4% unemployment. And I heard a stat comparing sales tax receipts, the first 6 months to 2020 compared to the first 6 months 2019. And we're only down 1% from 2019, which is, again, is staggering. Those 6 months, we went right through this whole COVID shutdown.
What is that telling us? What is all of that telling us, Jason? Sorry to move you along. We're up against time.
No, fine. There's a tremendous amount of activity. Housing sales are booming. Housing starts are active. People have adjusted. They're not hiding, if you will. They realize there's a threat, but they're living their lives. They're going about conducting business, and business is being done. And there was a great economy that was built, and people have wherewithal to participate going forward. And as Trump alluded to, should he win the election, next year might be a year for the record books.
Well, I mean, how are we talking about in terms of, because on the back of a potential stimulus, or what else are you looking at as indicators on that?
Well, I think people are learning how to live with COVID. If it's not going to be gone tomorrow, we're learning more and more about it. And like I said, we're conducting business, whether it be remote working from home, utilizing video conferencing. Public companies are raising capital all via, you used to do a roadshow. You jump on a private jet, you'd fly around to 5-6 different markets, 2 weeks of meetings. Now those meetings are taking place in 30-minute back-to-back segments on Zoom calls. And if people are saying, and I know this directly, it's actually more efficient, and they might not go back to that kind of fancy steak dinner, roadshow, private airplane model. So there's some efficiencies that are coming out of this.
You just sent chills down my spine. I want to get back to the fancy steak dinners, Jason. Hang on the line. I want to come back to you, get your broader thoughts on the race that's shaping up. The polls, are they real or not? Do real people out there in the real country like Jason pay attention to any of this stuff? We'll find out. I want to get more of you on this show as time passes as well. This is not just supposed to be me talking at you. We're supposed to be talking to each other, with each other, conversing. And so I'm just so grateful for so many people who have joined up as supporters of the website, and that allows us to carry on a conversation offline. And then effectively I can see if you're good to come on air like Jason is. He's been fantastic so far. We'll hear from more of him after this break. Been a busy old day. Was going through the House Select Committee intelligence report on China yesterday after the show, and this morning further so that we could talk about it on the War Room. At 10 a.m. this morning, went through the 77 odd pages of CNN SSRS polling this morning before the show as well. Between that show and this one, we packed about 20 new of our membership packs up in little packets with my signed copy of my book and the bumper stickers and all of that, and a letter from me and everything, and the hat that you get for joining up on the National Pulse. Packed a load of those off. Those are being shipped off. Signed a bunch of the books. My hand hurts, of course. It's been a busy old day on our end. Went through more of the polls. Went through the Monmouth poll. Went through the Florida poll. These things take a lot of time, which is why I know I promised yesterday that we'd have up the story about the Zuckerberg group that Phil Klein was talking to us about yesterday. It is up there now on the nationalpulse.com. The Zuckerberg group funding 99.4% of voter engagement, of its voter engagement budget to Democrat districts. You can get into the detail there at the nationalpulse.com. Natalie Winters is not in studio today, as you can see. If we can get a wide shot, can we get a wide shot here? Look at this open, this open empty chair next to me. No, yeah, there we go. Look at this, sad. She's working on a bunch of empty chair, Natalie. She's working on a bunch of scoops right now, so I thought best to get them finished off, and so we can publish on the National Pulse as we get closer and closer to the election. There's just so much, and I want you guys to understand how the sausage is made. So I just thought I'd explain that to you for a couple of minutes here. We're not a huge team, but we do our best over at the Pulse. Bringing on Jason Underwood, bringing back Jason Underwood from the last segment, one of our members. And Jason, thank you again for joining up and supporting our work. Let me just ask you this question, actually. Why? Why did you join up to be a National Pulse member?
Well, I've been following the War Room ever since the impeachment, and just enjoying the direct information, leading information, if you will. You were clearly on the impeachment leading, and then on the pandemic, before anybody was talking about it. You know, I'm calling my financial advisors. They're sending me reports on SARS from back in the last one, how the market kind of just did this and that, and it was a non-event. I don't think that was during Obama's term, and he didn't really even make a national issue of it. So anyway, I really appreciate the leading edge information that you provide, both that impacts economic decisions I make and informs me politically and really on a global basis as we reach all the way across to China. So I more and more look to these sort of news outlets to bring forward real information, and so glad to support it.
We really appreciate it. Jason, I wanted to get your thoughts on the broader perspective now on the campaign, where it's going, who's got the momentum, whether or not people like you, your friends, your family members, ordinary voters out there are listening to the campaigns now, or whether or not you've basically already made up your minds. What are you finding out there, and are you finding anybody's being influenced by these polls that keep telling us that, yeah, you know, Biden's up by 5 billion points today?
Well, you know, funny enough, I had the chance to have dinner with a gentleman yesterday who is a Biden supporter, and he asked me, he said, who do you think is going to win the election? And I said, well, you know, I think Trump. And he said, well, it's just impossible. Biden's up by 14 points. And this is a very educated, successful businessman. And we got into it a little bit about the polls, and it's not a lot of people do the digging and try to understand, are the sampling sets properly set up? Meaning, are we oversampling the Democrat? Are we oversampling or undersampling Republicans? So it's the headlines are out there. I think they serve more as comfort for a Biden supporter than as much concern for a Trump supporter. Because we've been through this dance before, 2016. I mean, Hillary, it's almost like a redo. You can't find Hillary anywhere on the campaign trail. She looks as if there's truly something physically wrong with her. Remember the pass out, I think it was on 9/11, right, as they try to get into the Scooby van. And Biden's the same deal. He's constantly making these mental, I wouldn't even call them gaffes. They're more of like just a misfire. They just... He gets off topic, and
kind of fading away of the thought process. You can see it happening in real time.
It's almost guaranteed at every event. It's not if it's going to happen. It's just the magnitude. You know, what's he going to say now?
I laugh. So we laugh about this, but actually, it's not that funny when you think about it. That they're putting this guy up. I mean, this is the reason he calls himself a transitional or a transition candidate. It's the reason he talks about the Harris-Biden campaign, Jason.
Right. Well, look, like I said, it's almost a redo. You've got a person that is not a a new voice in the party, not as if it were a progressive party. It's a person who's been there 50 years. The record speaks for itself, and so I don't think most Trump supporters get concerned when it was 14 points down yesterday. It's 16 points down today. What's going to be 37 points down tomorrow? It's like at some point
you got to look at it and realize that a lot of these polls, Jason, what they're effectively trying to tell us is that Joe Biden is going to carry 520 electoral college votes. I mean, that's the level of stupidity they think that we are endowed with, and I think it's just a disgrace that these pollsters get away with just keep continuing to stack these sample sizes and lying to the American public to push them in a certain direction, or try and push them in a certain direction. Just my final question to you, Jason. We're run out of time here. Do you have anything you want to plug? Any Twitter account that people should be following to get your views or anything like that?
Oh, no, sir. I let you and the professionals do that. I'm glad to give insight whenever you like.
How dare you? There is nothing professional about me.
No, words are essential. What I will say, though, is just driving up and down the road, all you see is Trump flags, Trump yard signs. These rallies are unbelievable. If you're not the rally, these car parades. 500 cars blocking up Main Street in small town America, and it's not just here; it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And
Jason, we got to bounce. We got to bounce.
Okay.
We're right at the end of our show. Jason Underwood, we'll have you back again. I assure you, it's been fantastic. It's great to hear from people out there in the real country, not here in downtown Washington D.C., where the only good things are the martinis I'm about to have. We'll be back with more tomorrow on the National Pulse at 3 p.m. Stick around on Real America's Voice. See you tomorrow in the War Room at 10 a.m.